It was another quiet evening in our shared apartment, the hum of the fridge the only sound breaking the stillness. I sat on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, pretending to care about the endless stream of memes and updates. My roommate, Jordan, was in their room. It was one of those nights where the air felt heavier, the silence charged with something unspoken. The truth? I wasn't as relaxed as I looked. There was a knot in my stomach, a buzzing in my chest that had been growing stronger over the past few months. Sharing a space with Jordan had always been easy, too easy maybe. But lately, things had felt different. Not in a bad way necessarily, but in a way I couldn't quite put into words. I glanced over at their door, slightly ajar. The soft glow of their desk lamp spilled out, casting a faint golden light on the hallway floor. That light had become a kind of comfort to me, a small beacon of warmth on lonely nights. I found myself watching it more than I cared to admit, wondering what they were doing, what they were thinking. That night, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to shift. The air carried an unfamiliar tension, a sense of inevitability that made my skin tingle. Jordan wasn't just my roommate, they were my friend. My confidant. The person I turned to when the world outside felt too harsh or overwhelming. We'd spent countless nights talking about everything and nothing, our conversations drifting from silly jokes to deep confessions. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, that lingered in my mind long after they passed. The way their laughter would soften when they looked at me. The way their hand had lingered on mine that one time we reached for the same coffee mug. The way their gaze seemed to hold something more than friendship when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it all in my head? A projection of feelings I wasn't ready to admit to myself? Or was there something real, something neither of us had dared to acknowledge? That night, as I sat there pretending to focus on my phone, I felt a shift. It wasn't anything I could see or hear, just a quiet realization settling over me. Something was going to happen, and whatever it was, it would change everything. I didn't know it yet, but by the time the night was over, I'd be forced to confront a truth I'd been avoiding for far too long. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. Jordan and I had met by chance, two strangers in search of affordable housing in a city that didn't make it easy. I remember our first meeting vividly. We were both clutching the same flyer for a shared apartment listing, exchanging awkward smiles as the landlord walked us through the place. Neither of us was particularly sold on it, but the price was right, and we quickly realized we could tolerate each other. That was all it took to sign the lease and step into what I thought would be a simple arrangement. At first, it was exactly that. Two people sharing a space, exchanging polite small talk and figuring out how to coexist without stepping on each other's toes. Jordan was easygoing, the kind of person who made you feel comfortable without trying. They had this quiet charm, a dry sense of humor that would catch me off guard in the best way. It didn't take long for the polite small talk to turn into real conversations. We found ourselves spending more time together than I'd expected. Evenings became a ritual of sorts. Jordan cooking dinner while I kept them company, the two of us eating on the couch and laughing over whatever random show we decided to watch. They had a way of making even the most mundane things feel special, whether it was arguing over the best way to cook pasta or singing off-key to whatever song was stuck in their head that day. It wasn't just the fun moments, though. Jordan was there in the quiet, heavy times too. When I had a rough day at work or felt overwhelmed by life, they'd listen without judgment, offering words of comfort or simply sitting beside me in silence. I did the same for them, though they rarely asked for it. Jordan had this self-reliant streak, always trying to shoulder everything on their own. It made me want to be there for them even more. We shared our stories in pieces, late at night when the world felt far away. I told them about my childhood, my dreams, my fears. They opened up about their family, their struggles, their hopes for the future. There was a vulnerability in those moments that felt rare, a kind of unspoken trust that made our apartment feel less like a shared space and more like a home. Looking back, there were signs even then, little things that hinted at something deeper. The way Jordan's eyes would linger on me just a second too long during a conversation. The way they'd laugh at my terrible jokes, even when no one else would. The way they'd brush against me in the kitchen, their touch light but lingering enough to make my heart race. There was a night that stands out in my memory, though it seemed insignificant at the time. We were watching a movie, something neither of us was particularly interested in, when a storm knocked out the power. Sitting there in the dim glow of candlelight, we talked for hours, our words flowing effortlessly. At one point, I looked over and found them staring at me, their expression soft, almost unreadable. I asked what they were thinking, and they just smiled, shaking their head as if to say, nothing. But the moment stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after we'd said goodnight. Even in our ordinary routines, there was a rhythm to our lives that felt uniquely ours. The mornings where we'd pass each other in the hallway, groggy and half asleep, exchanging tired smiles. The afternoons spent in comfortable silence, each of us doing our own thing but still feeling connected. The nights where laughter filled the apartment, making it hard to remember what life had been like before we'd met. It wasn't perfect, of course. We had our disagreements, whose turn it was to take out the trash, why Jordan always left their laundry in the dryer for too long. But even in those moments, there was an underlying warmth, a sense that we were both trying in our own way. What struck me most about Jordan was their authenticity. They were unapologetically themselves, in a way that made me want to be more honest with who I was. There was a kind of freedom in their presence, a reminder that it was okay to let my guard down, to stop pretending I had it all figured out. Our friendship had become the foundation of my life, something steady and dependable in a world that often felt anything but. Yet, beneath that foundation, there was a growing tension, a quiet undercurrent I couldn't ignore. It wasn't anything we talked about, but it was there, in the way our conversations seemed to stretch longer than they needed to, in the way their laughter felt like home, in the way my heart would skip a beat whenever they walked into the room. As much as I tried to deny it, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing. The lines between friendship and something more were blurring, and I wasn't sure where we'd end up. All I knew was that whatever we had, it was important. It mattered. And I was terrified of losing it, even as I found myself wanting more. The shift began subtly, so much so that I might not have noticed it if I hadn't been paying attention. It was in the small, everyday moments that felt just a little too charged, as if the air between us had thickened with something unsaid. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination. I didn't want to read too much into the lingering glances, the soft hesitations in our conversations, the way Jordan seemed to hover just a moment longer than necessary when they were near me. But the moments kept piling up, weaving themselves into a pattern I couldn't ignore. There was one evening when we were sitting on the couch, our usual spot, sharing a bag of chips and laughing at a show neither of us really liked. It was ordinary, comfortable, until our hands brushed as we both reached into the bag. It wasn't the first time something like that had happened, but this time, neither of us moved away. For a split second, our eyes met, and in that instant, I felt everything I'd been trying to push down rise to the surface. I looked away first, my heart racing, but I could feel Jordan's gaze lingering. They didn't say anything, but their silence was louder than words. That moment replayed in my mind long after they'd gone to bed, my thoughts spiraling with what it could mean. Things only grew more complicated from there. Jordan started spending more time around me, finding excuses to be close. They'd sit a little closer on the couch, their knee brushing mine. They'd linger in the kitchen when I was cooking, leaning against the counter and watching me with a softness in their eyes that made it hard to breathe. I found myself responding in ways I hadn't before. My jokes became softer, more personal. My laughter felt different, lighter, as if it was meant just for them. I started noticing things about Jordan I hadn't before. The way their eyes crinkled when they smiled, the way their voice softened when they said my name. It wasn't just physical closeness, though. Our conversations began to take on a new depth, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. One night, Jordan asked me what I was afraid of most. The question caught me off guard, and before I could stop myself, I blurted out the truth: losing what we have. Jordan didn't respond right away. They just looked at me, their expression unreadable. When they finally spoke, their voice was quiet. Me too. That was the first time I realized they might be just as scared as I was, that the unspoken tension between us wasn't one-sided. But even then, neither of us dared to address it head-on. It was safer to let it linger in the spaces between us, unspoken but undeniable. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon. We'd both decided to stay in, the gray sky outside matching the restless energy I felt inside. Jordan was working on something at the dining table, while I flipped through an old book on the couch. The silence between us was comfortable, but there was a charge to it, like the calm before a storm. At one point, Jordan got up to grab something from the kitchen. As they walked past me, their hand brushed my shoulder, light and fleeting, but enough to send a jolt through me. I looked up, and they were already looking back, their expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "Is something wrong?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Jordan hesitated, as if weighing their words. "No," they said finally, but their tone didn't match their answer. I wanted to press them, to ask what they weren't saying, but the fear of what their answer might be kept me silent. Instead, I nodded, trying to ignore the way my chest tightened as they walked away. That evening, I found myself standing in the hallway outside their room. The door was open just enough for me to see them sitting on their bed, their head in their hands. They looked up when they noticed me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jordan nodded, motioning for me to come in. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands fidgeting in my lap. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I could feel their gaze on me, but I couldn't bring myself to meet it. "What's going on?" I finally managed to say. For a moment, Jordan didn't respond. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, they said, "I think you know." Their words hung in the air between us, fragile and full of meaning. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. "I don't want to assume," I said, my voice trembling. Jordan reached out then, their hand covering mine. The touch was gentle but firm, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. "You're not assuming," they said softly. "I've been scared to say it, but I care about you. More than I should, maybe. More than I know how to explain." The words hit me like a wave, washing over me and pulling me under. I didn't know what to say, how to respond, but as I looked into their eyes, I saw the same fear and longing that I'd been carrying. "I care about you too," I admitted, my voice barely audible. For a moment, neither of us moved, the weight of the confession settling over us. Then Jordan smiled, a small tentative smile that felt like a lifeline. "Where do we go from here?" they asked, their voice laced with uncertainty. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I want to figure it out. With you." It wasn't a resolution, not really, but it was a beginning. A step into the unknown together. And for the first time in a long time, the fear didn't feel so overwhelming. The tension that had been building between us finally reached its breaking point one evening. The air in the apartment felt heavy, charged with an unspoken energy that neither of us could ignore any longer. It was late, and the rain outside tapped persistently against the windows, as though echoing the storm inside me. Jordan was in the kitchen, their back to me as they methodically washed the dishes, but I could see the stiffness in their shoulders. I stood in the doorway, hesitating. My heart was racing, my mind a chaotic jumble of thoughts. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to keep the fragile peace intact, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The weight of everything unsaid had become unbearable. "Jordan," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. They froze for a moment before turning to face me. Their expression was guarded, their eyes searching mine for something, perhaps a sign of what was coming. "Yeah," they said, their tone casual, but I could hear the tension underneath. I stepped further into the room, my hands gripping the edge of the counter for support. "We need to talk." Jordan's eyes flickered with something, fear perhaps or anticipation. They put the dish they were holding down and leaned against the sink, crossing their arms. "Okay," they said, their voice cautious. For a moment, I didn't know how to start. The words I'd rehearsed 100 times in my head felt inadequate, too small to contain the enormity of what I needed to say. But then I saw the way Jordan was looking at me, uncertain, vulnerable, and the dam broke. "I can't keep doing this," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't keep pretending like everything's fine, like I don't feel something for you." Jordan's eyes widened, their breath catching audibly. They didn't speak, but I could see the way their hands clenched into fists, their knuckles turning white. "I know it's complicated," I continued, my words spilling out in a rush. "I know it might ruin everything, but I can't keep hiding it. I care about you, Jordan. More than I should, maybe more than you want me to, but it's the truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Jordan stared at me, their expression unreadable, and for a moment, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. But then they took a step closer, their arms uncrossing, their hands trembling slightly. "You think I don't feel the same," they said, their voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a punch to the chest, knocking the air out of my lungs. "You what?" I managed to say, my voice shaky. Jordan laughed softly, a sound tinged with disbelief. "Do you know how many times I've tried to tell you? How many nights I've stayed up, rehearsing what I'd say, only to chicken out every time?" I stared at them, my mind struggling to catch up. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was scared," they admitted, their voice breaking slightly. "Scared of ruining what we have, of losing you. But I can't keep pretending either. I care about you too. So much it scares me." The words hung between us, raw and unfiltered. For a moment, neither of us moved, the weight of the confession settling over us. Then, almost as if by instinct, we stepped toward each other at the same time. "I don't know where this goes," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know how this works, but I don't want to lose you." "You won't," Jordan said firmly, their hand reaching out to brush against mine. The touch was gentle but grounding, like an anchor in the storm. "We'll figure it out. Together." The closeness between us was electric, every inch of space charged with possibility. Jordan's eyes searched mine, their gaze filled with a mix of fear and hope. Slowly, hesitantly, they reached up to cup my face, their thumb brushing against my cheek. "Is this okay?" they asked, their voice barely audible. I nodded, my breath hitching. "Yeah," I said, my voice breaking on the word. And then their lips were on mine, soft and tentative, as if testing the waters. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt before, gentle yet consuming, a moment that seemed to stretch on forever. When we finally pulled apart, their forehead rested against mine, both of us breathing heavily. "I've wanted to do that for so long," Jordan admitted, their voice shaky but full of emotion. "Me too," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The rain outside had stopped, the world around us suddenly quiet. In that moment, it felt as though time itself had paused, leaving just the two of us in our little bubble of warmth and vulnerability. We stayed like that for a while, neither of us wanting to break the spell. When Jordan finally pulled back, their hand lingered on my cheek, their eyes searching mine. "What now?" they asked, their voice filled with uncertainty. I smiled, a small, tentative smile. "Now we figure it out. Together." It wasn't a perfect resolution, not by a long shot. There were still questions to answer, challenges to face, but for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. We'd taken the first step, and that was enough for now. The days that followed felt surreal, like I was walking through a dream I never wanted to wake up from. Things between Jordan and me shifted, but it wasn't in the dramatic way I had imagined. Instead, it was subtle, gentle, as though we were both easing into this new chapter, cautious but hopeful. We didn't talk about labels or what we were supposed to call this thing between us. Instead, we focused on being present with each other, savoring the small moments that felt so monumental now, like the way their hand would casually brush against mine when we walked side by side, or how their laughter seemed to fill the entire room, making everything else fade away. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie we weren't really paying attention to, Jordan turned to me, their expression thoughtful. "Do you think this will change everything?" they asked, their voice soft, almost hesitant. I considered their question, the weight of it settling over me. "I think it already has," I said honestly. "But maybe that's not a bad thing." They nodded, their eyes fixed on mine. "I'm scared, you know," they admitted, their vulnerability catching me off guard. Not of us, but of what comes next. Of what people might say, or how things might get complicated. I reached for their hand, intertwining my fingers with theirs. "I'm scared too," I confessed. "But I think it's worth it." "You're worth it." Jordan's smile was small but genuine, and in that moment, I knew we'd be okay. It wouldn't be easy, but we'd face it together. Over the next few weeks, we began to navigate our new reality. There were moments of pure joy, like the time Jordan surprised me with my favorite coffee after a long day, or when we stayed up talking late into the night, our voices barely above whispers. But there were challenges too, awkward conversations with friends who noticed the change between us, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. One evening, we decided to finally talk about it. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the dim light casting soft shadows on Jordan's face. "Do you think we need to tell people?" Jordan asked, their fingers nervously tracing patterns on the table. I thought about it for a moment. "I think we should do what feels right for us," I said. "We don't owe anyone an explanation." This is our thing, and we get to decide how we handle it. Jordan nodded, a small smile playing on their lips. You're right. I don't want to hide, but I also don't want to rush into anything. Then we take it one step at a time, I said, reaching across the table to take their hand. No pressure, no expectations. Just us. That seemed to ease their mind, and I felt a sense of relief too. We didn't have all the answers, but we were figuring it out together, and that was enough. As time went on, we found a rhythm. Our days were filled with the mundane yet beautiful routines of everyday life. Cooking dinner together, arguing over which movie to watch, stealing kisses in the hallway when no one was looking. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that made it special. One night, as we lay in bed, the room bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the window, Jordan turned to me. Do you ever think about how we got here? They asked, their voice barely above a whisper. All the time, I admitted, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. How something so unexpected can end up feeling so right. Jordan nodded, their hand reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. I'm glad it happened, they said softly. Even if it was scary at first, even if we didn't know what we were doing. I wouldn't change it for anything. Their words filled me with a warmth I couldn't quite describe, a sense of belonging I had never felt before. Me neither, I said, my voice filled with emotion. You mean so much to me, Jordan. More than I ever thought possible. In that moment, it felt as though everything had fallen into place. The fears, the doubts, the uncertainty, they were still there, but they didn't seem as overwhelming anymore. We had each other, and that was enough to face whatever came our way. As I lay there, listening to the sound of Jordan's breathing, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. For the journey that had brought us here, for the challenges we had faced, and for the connection that had grown between us. We didn't have all the answers, and maybe we never would. But that was okay. Life was messy and unpredictable, but it was also beautiful, and I was finally learning to embrace it. And as I closed my eyes, my hand resting lightly in Jordan's, I knew that this was just the beginning of something incredible. Whatever the future held, we would face it together, one step at a time.